Goodhue. Gualtieri.
Here.
Pomeroy.
Here.
Croman.
Steve, do you mind switching over to the Chamber's computer? There we go. And Daniel, since you're by the lights, do you mind dimming for us? Since you're by the lights, would you mind dimming a little bit for us? Thank you. Or blackout works. Okay, so I'll be giving an update on the historic context statement update. And while the board is well familiar with this project, we've last month we had our meeting canceled, and it has been several months since we've done this presentation. So I'm going to give it again for anyone new, and as we're really coming to the end here. So bear with me. As background, we have the city's historic context statement was first updated way back in 1994, and then updated in 1997, and then it was updated in 2008 to cover the 1940 to 1965 period, and then very recently in 2022, updated to cover 1966 to 1986. The context statement is part of the city's general plan and part of our municipal code as well. What is a historic context statement? It's a narrative of historic, social, and architectural context, but mostly architectural, and that's really what we're getting at with this current update, to keep it to the architectural history. And it's a framework to understand the significance of built resources and the level of integrity needed to qualify them as historic. So you'll hear those words, significance and integrity, throughout. So, in 2022, that phase 1 update was funded by a grant from the state. We worked with past consultants, Seth Bergstein, who meets the Secretary of the Interior's standards, and also Kent Seavey, who's assisting on the project. And that update was adopted by our City Council and the Coastal Commission as well. The current update, 2024 phase 2 update, again, partially funded by a state grant. We have past consultants, thankfully, on board for continuity. And this spring, we really initiated the project. We did reach out to tribal representatives, and we identified our 3 main project goals, being chronological themes, consistent formatting, and streamlined content. So I'm just going to go through those 3 goals quickly. Chronological themes. So previously, we had our themes, and they were topical, not chronological. So this really makes updates very challenging. Every time we go to add on another, say, 20-year period, you got to go into every single theme. And not only does it make updates tricky, but also these themes were very broad. Economic development, for example, government, arts and culture. These themes really carry throughout the city's entire history. So what we proposed is the chronological ordering of themes to make it simple to add on to as we go along, and also simple just to open up this document, identify when was a building constructed, and start from there. So again, with the consistent formatting, within each theme, you will see a historic context narrative that's going to talk about any major events or major persons of significance. Not every single person, but the key events and the key people. And that historic context is followed by an architectural development context. So major architectural developments, the emergence of new styles, that sort of thing. And then it is followed by the associated property types and registration requirements. So that's like the architectural style sheets. I have those printed out for you and copies for our audience. So the architectural property types consist of a style sheet with the style name and dates and photographs, and then an introductory text, a list of character defining features, and then examples, representative local buildings. And that's followed by your registration requirements, and that is in the form of a significance chart that outlines the criteria for the national, the California register, what the Carmel City Code says, and then what level of significance qualifies something for listing on the Carmel inventory, accompanied by integrity considerations. So let's say we've identified a style, we've identified that it's significant, but does it retain integrity? So we have our minimum eligibility requirements. So something must have, X, Y, and Z to retain integrity. So our next goal was streamline content. And this quote simply says, it's not a comprehensive community history. Rather, it needs to be direct to the point and easily understood. So for a comprehensive history, we do have our history room in the library. We also have past editions of this document. We have a local librarian, historian who you can go visit. But this document is not an all-encompassing history. And just because, let's say, a style or an architect or a prior owner isn't discussed in this document doesn't preclude a finding of potential historic significance. Here's an example of how we've streamlined the content. So that's just a sentence. There was a lot of language like this in our old context statement, and you can see how it's problematic. So we have a name here, but we don't know where he built his house or how he was active in village life. This is literally just a sentence on its own with nothing to support it. So who this gentleman is, where he lived, and what he did would all come out through the normal process of that intensive survey, where we prepare a DPR form, do intensive research on all past owners, occupants, what their professions were. But to do that in the context statement, there's not enough pages. So I will say it's streamlined, however, it has grown in size. I'm sorry. On the left, you see the old table of contents, and we've added quite a few pages, new table of contents on the right. And why is that? First of all, we've added a lot of photographs, so that's going to add to the bulk of the document, but we think it's very important. And also, everything highlighted in there is new, but also really critical. When the context statement was first developed in the 90s, we didn't have the type of guidance. The standards for these documents has evolved, and now we know that, first of all, like how to use this document, that's something we felt was important to include. And then, of course, the evaluation criteria, the National Register, the California Register, the Carmel inventory, it simply has to be in there. As a review, here's our project timeline. Started in the spring. The board and the public has taken a look at the table of contents, and then the 30% draft and the 50% draft. Last month, we were scheduled to discuss the 70% draft. Unfortunately, that meeting was canceled, but it was distributed to the public, and feedback was encouraged via email. Here we are today to talk about our 100%, and I'm going to say it's still a working draft. We can absolutely make changes to this, and we're eager to hear your thoughts and feedback. Next month, we'll come back to you with the final draft, and that's when we expect the Historic Resources Board to hopefully recommend that the City Council adopt the document. We also need to go to the Planning Commission. They'll also hopefully recommend council adoption, and then in January. So you can see here, we are pushing it to the last month we can with our timeline, because we really want to give the board and the public the time they need to read it, because it is a big document. We recognize that. So Eric Dyer is the liaison that you appointed to work with city staff and our consultant. So we had a meeting, staff, past consultants, and Eric. We have some questions, and since that meeting, and since the publication of the staff report, we've been working with the consultant. We have some ideas and answers to these questions, but we're curious to hear what you think as well. So we can return to these, but just really quickly, some of the questions are, we really want to nail down the theme names, the architectural styles, and the character defining features. You know, this is what you work with every month to determine whether or not resources are or aren't historic. So we got to get this right. And then my sub questions are, when we're looking at the character defining features, are they specific enough to each style so that someone in the public or a board member can easily go to that list and identify whether or not it falls into a particular style? Highlights there for when the end date of a style was put as 1986. As you know, that's just the end date of this document. It doesn't mean a style ended that year, but we'd like to have discussion about that approach versus really sticking to the heyday of a style and maybe adding language about, you know, style start and end dates aren't hard and fast. It's not like one day architects are building in one style and the next day they decide to build in another style. And then lastly, we want to talk about the Carmel cottage style. That's one that we'll definitely be talking more about. Next, I'd love to hear if you have a preference on how we caption the many images in this document. So there's a lot of options I came up with for you. We want to be consistent throughout. So curious to hear what you think about that one. And then what do you think about the photographs in the document? We'll be going back through for cleanup, but in terms of how many, interested to hear what you think. Also, in some cases, we have architectural styles where simply that era really hasn't been surveyed yet, so we don't have buildings listed on our inventory right now. This is just one example, the California Ranch style. I think none of these buildings are on our inventory, so they're either just outside our city limits or simply not yet evaluated. So we feel that the California Ranch style is very important to include, but we just don't have the examples yet to show for it, so we can talk about that. And then lastly, we've just added in kind of a conclusions portion where it talks about next steps. This is something you'll often find in context statements as a goals, what to think about, what's our next project potentially. So we do have Kent and Seth here. I'd like to invite you guys up for any comments, and then I can come back to these slides for questions and receive your comments. Alternatively, if you want to wait until after they comment, it's up to you.
What would you guys, hi, Steve Taskett, so it's great to see everybody again. What would you prefer? We're here for as long as you want us. The styles are the priority, we feel, but it's turned out to not be a very streamlined document. There's a lot there. So do you want to chat first, and then we'll just sit and, yeah.
What's the group? Sorry, you want to hear that before we start talking? Okay, why don't you guys present?
I'm Kent Seeley, the other guy, and certified by the state as a historic preservation consultant. Might add that all of the buildings that we looked at and included are listed with the city. So it's not a matter of reaching out somewhere and say that's a nice example.
Just with the exception of some of the newer styles. Yeah. I think the California Ranch is about the only one. But but we did that. That's one thing that, by the way, that was a fantastic preservation. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for the summary.
A note, the California Ranch is a linear building. We have 50 by 100 foot lots. There are California ranches, but they're on the side. And that gets to be a problem in recording them.
And trying to photograph them. Yeah. I guess maybe the best way to structure a discussion is, why don't we start with style names? Now, at the 30%, you approved all the style names all of the theme names that we have. The reason why we changed continuity and change to the Carmel dynamic is it became very clear once Carmel becomes, the place to come to, which is really in the village and a forest theme, when there this conflict of tourism and maintaining this bohemian artistic culture in Carmel really starts to tug. And rather than calling it a conflict or calling it something negative, we wanted to look at it as it's a dynamic. I mean, it's changing all the time. But there are also certain things that are constant, and then that'll relate to our thematic end dates, which we can get to later. But as far as we're concerned, that dynamic continues, and my guess would be it will continue. But as far as we're concerned, we feel that narrative has been introduced very early. We have quotes from the Carmel Pinecone and authors there. We have Daisy Bostick quotes. We have a Steinbeck quote in the 60s talking about all this. So a lot of people are talking about this, and we wanted to make sure we got some primary information on that to justify why we were changing that thematic name. But all the other names have remained the same. So it's certainly a decision. We like a little input on that, but and frankly, the information within that theme wouldn't change much. It's just a question of going back and modifying a bunch of the narrative. It's a bit of work. But we like your opinions on that. And by the way, if it's been too much and you haven't gotten to it yet, we totally understand. It's just that we're on such a fast time schedule, and we'll get to this, but we really need all comments within the end of this week, Monday at the latest. It'll take us 2 weeks to get this buttoned up. Catherine and I have some office work to do together, to sit down together and do a bunch of stuff. And if it's possible, just to lay that out there, we'd like to get final comments on October 28th. As far as the themes go, switching this to the actual styles, we had our subcommittee meeting with Eric, Marnie, and Catherine about 10 days ago. Curious what you guys think if you've had time to deal with it, but we kind of feel like this Carmel Cottage thing is not working. And we're kind of thinking we should pull it out, and we have solutions for that. But I'm curious to hear what other experts' opinions are about this. We think it might be difficult to defend. If we get a small building, we're thinking it's probably more vernacular in orientation, and vernacular probably ends by World War II anyway. I don't see a lot of modern clients coming in and wanting to build cottages anymore. Certainly architects, modernists like John Thodos was building cottages up until the late 80s, and then he was calling them cottages. But to turn that into a style the way we did it, we were really trying to answer this problem that planning's been having with these small buildings, and are they listable or not? So we spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. We've introduced it to Eric and the planning staff, and I think we're all kind of on the fence. I think if Eric was here, I don't want to speak for him, but his question more was, is it really a style? And as an architect, and as us as architectural historians, cottage is really a form or a type. It's really not a style. Context statements can break new grounds, and they should be localized to the city. This is a very, very, speaking for myself, this was the toughest city I've ever documented. It is, for such a small space, the variety, the history, the people, it's extraordinary. It's amazing. We're not going to get everything codified, and remember, we have phase 1 and intensive surveys required, and you have great historians here on staff that do it. So we're always going to go to a phase 1 anyway. This document is intended to, three things, is to be a guide for everybody that might want to read it at all levels of education, and also a guide to styles and intensive surveys. If an historian that's not on your list comes in and evaluates something, it's meant for that too. It's really not meant to answer every question about every building you see. There's just such a variety here. The other priority we really have is exactly what Catherine had mentioned, is that we should all feel good about our start dates and end dates of these styles. And we have, I even have a couple newspaper articles to share when it's time, to where we think the ongoing styles are, and that's why we've kept them up to 1986. But anyway, I don't want to spend too much of the public's time. I'd rather just leave it at that for now. What about you?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments from the public before we close this off? Or we're going to close it off. Anyone that wants to start with this?
Admittedly, I don't know if I was around for the first one in '94. I might have been. I'm more comfortable with the term vernacular than I am with Carmel Cottage. I mean, it's just a term that is used when you talk about a building that may not have a full-blown style. At least the word vernacular explains that it's very local and common to this area. So it wouldn't bother me if you went back to using vernacular. I think you did in some places in the document, but do you want other comments on other subjects? Yeah. Okay. Well, I like the expanded layout from the old ones, and the photos and the titles of the themes I think are very helpful. And at first I was puzzled when you used the term Carmel dynamic. I just had never really thought of it that way. But then as I read more through the material, there is obviously a dynamic going on here, and it's been going on for 100 years. So, I mean, it's nothing new. So I've sort of gotten my head wrapped around that, and it sounds like a good term, better than the one that you described about continued something. It didn't sound quite right. There was one, I had a very minor question, and maybe it isn't appropriate in this document, but I do recall that in the early 80s, so it would still fit into this period that you're studying, there was a huge controversy in the Carmel dynamic that had to do with the building of Piccadilly Park on Dolores Street. And does this document go into parks at all, or would that be inappropriate?
I had thought that Piccadilly Park was after 86, but it definitely illustrates the theme.
I think it's
but we
earlier.
have parks and open space in there. Was it?
I just
are we
don't know.
incorrect? Was it earlier? Was it before 86? Because we can add it. I'm sure I could find research on it.
Yeah, I think that it would be worth just checking, because I know that was a big issue here, and it involved the city council, the mayor, and one of the women on the city council was an early environmentalist, Helen Arnold, and she was very active and had the Carmel Women's, the Garden Club, propose this change. There was going to be a building instead of the park. Mm-hmm. And so to me, if there's a space for it, at least I think a mention of that dynamic might be possible. And I also liked the end of this document. I felt like I was reading a novel in some places, but by the end, when you say that we need to update the survey and include some of these buildings from the 80s, which are not included, and also I think the historic district, the Comstock Hill, and also the downtown commercial district, which is pretty much done, but it would be nice to put it on a historic district in a format like that. So I'd be all in favor of that. And I'm very sorry to say that Sand and Sea didn't make it, because that should have been one of the first historic districts in Carmel, and just due to us, I think, not being prepared to speak up for that area, and it was 1940, I think a lot of people just didn't take much issue with it. But I think I'm sure Kent would agree, it was a very important district that was lost. So anyway, I'm supportive of what you've done. I took the opportunity to read it, and I think it will really help people who are trying to understand the history here and the context of these buildings. It is mostly architectural, I think, but I just wanted to speak about the Piccadilly Park, because they tore down an old garden shop where the park is now, and I know it was very controversial. If it fits into the 86 issue, that would be great. Okay. And I agree with Catherine's concern about having these 1986 dates. I don't know if we could just do something to say when they start, but do we have to say when they end, each of these? I don't know.
Well, and as you know, being a former SHPO, you've read plenty of historic context statements. You have an update, and which we did the up to the 86 update 2 years ago. Generally, it's a very interesting question, but generally, as you update, you're trying to identify new styles. Like what new styles came in that time period. What's a little tricky here is 86 is not 50 years yet.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, so we went back and forth about how do we add. I drove this place a million times. Do I see any what we like to all call good buildings from that time period? And I've seen some. One thing it did for us is it kind of cemented something. Actually, I'll bring that out now because speaking of the districts, Kent Seavey was the one who surveyed and recommended these districts in 2002. So that's how long ago we've been working with our survey. I think I have this quote in the HCS, but it's really funny. So he was covered in a Carmel Pinecone article in 2002, and he basically summarized, but way back then, what are the four styles still being built right now? And what's interesting is our research has kind of bared that out. And it was arts and crafts. His quote is Comstock's Fairy, I'll read the quote. If nothing else, the competing styles, including the arts and crafts movement, emphasizing natural materials, Comstock's fairy tale cottages, the Mediterranean revival, and the modernist homes made Carmel what it is. And even in 2002, there's evidence of that now. So our recommendation, and we haven't finalized it, of course, is that those are basically the four styles that are still going on. The other one should have logical end dates about basically when that building is not being constructed anymore. Like a good example is minimal traditional. Once the ranch comes in, you're not going to see FHA minimal traditional houses much. So that 1950 date, again, it might sandwich a year or two or three before or after, but it's pretty clear, you know, without looking at all the building records in Carmel, there might be some that were built in 51 or whatever, but generally, a minimal traditional building is not a vernacular building so much as it's done by FHA standards. That ends at 1950. Post-adobe is another good example. Even though we're seeing post-adobe in the valley still, and we've seen them a lot in the last 10 years, I don't see any newish Carmel buildings built with post-adobe. Frankly, the homeowners I meet on phase ones and phase twos find the buildings moist and not very livable, to be honest with you, as a ranch house. So it's just not something that stuck, but it's very important to the history of this location. So that's a firm end date. But our recommendation is to do end dates of 1986 for the period revival styles. So that would be Storybook, Tudor Revival, and what we're calling Spanish Eclectic. Bay Region Modern, of course, because we have so many modernists still doing work here, and California Ranch. That's really what we want to go up to 86. Everything else should have end dates pretty much relative to your theme. Obviously, minimal traditional comes in 5 years into the post-war theme because there's still this overlap after the war. There's a lot of materials available. People are still building them, but you know, we'd like to keep the styles within the themes. So that's why early Carmel vernacular is not vernacular, because they're just the earliest buildings when we don't have the railroad yet. We don't have all this, well, we have the railroad, but we don't have as much availability of materials. We don't have Murphy's Yard yet. You know, once we get further along and Murphy comes along, we're building more vernacular-ish, what we're also calling cottages, which we will change. But I think arguably vernacular would end probably around World War II. I mean, I just don't see Carmel cottages, for lack of a better term, being built as the next layer. To me, it's the ranch style, as Ken said, oriented, you know, the other way in the lot than we're used to seeing it for most of them around here. The ones you see in those photos are on Ridgewood Road, where that's like your only suburban subdivision in town limits is Ridgewood, and the other, Ladera is the other one. Those are all done by Bensberg, who was important here for that time period. And he did a few period revivals that are on the inventory as well. But so you don't get that standard ranch. You know, you get this sort of, sometimes you will, if there's a double lot purchase or a corner lot, you'll get, you'll get a nice earlier ranch with maybe a full width veranda or something on it. But you don't get it very often. But there's clearly people are still building ranches. But anyway, that's kind of a quick summary on the end dates of the 5 styles or so we see going to 86. And I could say pretty confidently from driving around enough that I'm seeing those styles. You know, I was trying to figure out ones I could include in that last chapter where we do recommendations, but I really didn't want to confuse and muddy the issue with, well, we don't know the exact date of those buildings. We don't really have time to figure it out. And you know, it's up to all of us to figure out when they become 50 years old if they're important. I don't think we should be conjecturing, you know, offering conjecture with this. We should really state what we see and the analytical structure to place it in. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it not on? That a Carmel cottage is a Carmel cottage, and it can be any style. And that the two derivations kind of confuse me. So I think it would be best if we just stuck to style for whatever the building is or whatever the size is. I'm also a little confused. I was brought up short by an architectural historian who told me that arts and crafts is a philosophy and craftsman is a style of architecture. And I see them used interchangeably here, and it confuses me a bit. I'm a little confused too. At one point, the Wilson building is referred to as shingle style, and then it's referred to as craftsman.
Oh, that's changed. It's really a shingle style building. If you really want to get nerdy, I'm an arts and crafts nerd, so I collect the stuff. It's in my house. I've been reading about it for 30 years. The arts and crafts name is derived out of England when the Garden City movement and Parker and Unwin are building their homes and trying to figure out how to deal with industrialization. The arts and crafts is a design movement as much as the Art Nouveau design movement, Art Deco. I mean, we all know what these things look like, right? Arts and crafts is linear. Frankly, it's the introduction of modernism because it's celebrating structure. But anyway, the origin of arts and crafts, I don't know if you had time, if you got a chance to see it, but we have a footnote that explains the various terms. And we'll switch to craftsman if you want, no issue for us.
You're calling it a variation of craftsman, I think.
No, craftsman, the history of craftsman, frankly, is really a United States history. The term craftsman comes from Gustav Stickley's magazine, which he starts in 1906. And all the philosophy of the arts and crafts movement is disseminated to all the architects and builders and everybody through that, and also through the simple home. Charles Keeler is essentially doing that in the West Coast. But if you look at Charles Keeler's earlier buildings, they are essentially McKim, Mead, and White, East Coast shingle-style variants that slowly develop into the broad California bungalow that we're familiar with today. So that's why on the caption for the theme, I changed that to shingle style on the introduction to the Seacoast of Bohemia theme. We changed that to shingle. I think it's more appropriate. The projecting bay windows and that boxy quality and the multi-pane aspect of it is again, it's hybriding. We're still in an eclectic phase here on that. The buildings you see in the arts and crafts style sheet, which we have here, we could go to, but that's really what California, pretty much classic craftsman buildings look like. But it is, you're right, it is mostly well known in the United States as the craftsman movement.
I'm not on one side or the other. I was just told that. So.
Well, frankly, I was concerned it would be viewed as sexist. I hate to say it. We usually say craftsmen, but there were a lot of craftswomen too, you know. And I just kind of felt like that's why I threw a footnote in just to say let's all talk about it. But it's an easy substitute in Word. We could easily make the change, but
I'm confused. That's all. That's okay.
Yeah.
If that's the way you want it to be. But I also wonder if you're aware of Richard Barrett's building, his Muse building, which is definitely, if you want to call it arts and crafts, you can see it from the library parking lot.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it was built in the 70s. It'd be worth looking at.
Richard Barrett's building?
Barrett tended to build in those idioms because he liked them. You can also see Bauhaus style by him sitting
Of
down
course,
on Nipro.
That's why
So
he's
it's a matter of
listed, yes,
choice. Here's
yes,
the situation where you pop into Carmel. So one of these, I like one of
but
those.
I'm talking about a specific building that
the
is
one behind the
definitely arts
library,
and
right
crafts or
across
craftsmen.
the one right across from the post office.
Yeah, it's the parking lot, yeah.
And I think that was, he touted that, I think, as an arts and crafts.
Yeah, he made a trip to England and
Yeah,
he's not been the
and then he
same
did the
since,
little
yeah.
cottage, he did the little library over on the other side here, which almost was
Yeah,
similar.
but I'm just wondered that's not noted anywhere, and I think it's a beautiful
still
building,
there?
and it's
Yeah,
worth being,
oh, yeah.
yeah. Is it?
Would you call it what I had? In all honesty, I can't remember everything, but I don't remember the building. It would be a way to illustrate the style continuing into the 70s. Do you think it's more arts and crafts? We could easily get a photo.
Yeah, we can get that from Richard, sure.
Take a look at it.
Okay.
Well, again, you know, an anomaly that pops up. So if there was a broad base instead of two, then I think we would be more prone to it. But
I think a style can...
we don't have any problems with making that as an
A
addition.
style can pop up at any time. Somebody
No.
could decide tomorrow that they're going to build something, you know, in the Mediterranean, whatever, and it would still be that style.
Well, exactly. That's what illustrates why we want to carry this to 86.
Yeah, that's why I don't think they should end at a certain period.
Okay.
Well, some do, though. The examples that we mentioned.
Somebody could
do.
always do it again.
Right, but they're not present in the building fabric.
Not yet.
Well, then when we encounter them at that time, you would update the context statement. I don't. But I'm confused because I feel like you're supporting kind of exactly what we're saying, and that is these 4 or 5 styles are continuing.
Yeah.
So we should keep the date up to
Yeah.
86. Okay. But unless people disagree, it would seem we have a pretty strong argument that the vernacular Carmel Cottage, which we're going to call vernacular, will essentially end at a certain date. Your themes are generally tied to your styles are generally tied to should be anyway, tied to your themes, and that's why the dates are specific. Now, it's very easy for a city like Pacific Grove, right? Because it grows in circular rings as time goes by. It gets, you know, and so you know where your Victorians are, you know where your craftsmen are, you know where your minimal traditionals are, then you know where your ranches are. Yeah, see, this is a very unusual place, and it's lot by lot by lot by lot.
Yeah, that's kind of my point.
Yeah, yeah. Is there another style you think, though, that we should carry further, or do you think the 5 we mentioned makes sense? Or I'm curious.
I think that it, even though Eric would disagree, we built a Tudor house about 12 years ago. Even though it's a modern house, it has all the earmarks of Tudor.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a modern house, not a Tudor house. So it can pop up anywhere.
Okay. So it sounds like we're all kind of on the same page on
Yeah.
extending these style years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just as long as you don't kill the styles.
Okay.
Seth, do you think 1986 is the appropriate end date, or like ongoing? Is that an option?
Oh.
Well, you set the dates.
Yeah, see, I mean, we're only supposed to work up to 86, but it's an interesting question. I don't see why you couldn't change it to ongoing for the ones that we kind of all agree with. Because then when the update comes, I would argue that the next consultant team would be surveying, going, oh, you know, where are these styles, you know?
But for the historic context statement purposes, we're looking at historic homes that fall under these different styles. And so, granted that anybody could build anything they want today and make it look exactly like it was 70 years ago or whatever, we're looking at these as the current inventory of historic homes. So I don't know why we wouldn't do an end date where the preponderance of all fill-in-the-blank homes aren't built, you know, around this time frame, and, you know, more or less end this time, and then we go to the next preponderance. I mean, we're never going to be 100%, and certainly we know that styles will continue throughout the ages, but I think that it's very broad, especially if I'm trying to look up something or I'm trying to narrow something down. If you say, you know, 1920 to 1986, that's a huge range where, you know, 95% of the homes that fall under that category were really built in between 1920 and 1945 or whatever.
Well, remember, 1942 to 1945, nobody's building
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And 1933 to 1950, and actually beyond that, the FHA is still playing in it because of the FHA and the GI Bill. We have all these damn houses.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of speaks to how we're kind of speaks to our point, is that you generally organize your themes by style. Your themes and your styles that's why you do it chronological. There's a reason why we pick these end dates on the themes. You know, I mean, it goes from bohemian, arts and crafts, woodsy, it goes in a stucco clad, you know, in village and a forest, and then it goes into, you know, this transitional period after the Depression and the war, and then everybody's coming back, we got to build ranch houses, you know, and the modernists, of course, the modernists are here in the late 20s and early 30s, but the preponderance of modernism now is showing up, particularly after the war. So, but it's frankly, all of the, my firm has written a bunch of historic context statements. We generally have end dates, firm end dates.
Yeah.
This is the first one where I've come across this question, and I get it now that I really understand the city's development. What is the end date, and are there ongoing styles? And I still think with these 5 styles that we've mentioned are ongoing. It sort of supports what Ms. Goodhue said, is we built a Tudor Revival building. So in the 50 years, it might be significant for association with you. You're on the board. We don't know. So, but the style.
What you just said is the key. It has to be 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to help us.
Yeah.
Having that.
Yeah, and also you have your intensive survey built into your ordinance. So even if some historian comes into town and goes, we don't agree with any of this context statement. We're going to work up on our own phase 1. Well, they got to prove it. They got to prove it in the historical record. They got to prove it in the story. They got to prove it with the integrity of the materials in the building. So you have that. I mean, this should not be considered. We go here and it solves every problem we have for development. It's a guide. It's a tool.
Colin? Okay. I did have a few items as I read through. First of all, I have to say thanks to Catherine and Seth and Kent. This has been a huge undertaking. You guys have done an amazing job. The most current version, if I was someone that had no idea and I just wanted to pull that up, it would be very, very helpful to me. I really like the way that there's such a great photo array, and that you can kind of go and crosswalk your style with your times and things like that. So I think none of us should pass on congratulating them and thanking them for really a job well done. And it's not been an easy task. So great job. I do have some nitpicky things. The Lewis House, for example, kind of listed as both arts and crafts and a Carmel vernacular home. There's some nitpicky things. I've given a list to Catherine, so she's tracking it. But I think overall, there's a really good effort.
Lewis House is remind
listed,
me?
Yeah, it's like on page 59, it's listed as both an arts and crafts and Carmel vernacular, and then on page 64, it's listed as a Carmel vernacular, and it's the same photo used. So, there's some things like that could be minimally confusing, but those are, like, at this point, that's just nitpicky that probably isn't even worth.
Yeah, I have some of the same thoughts, and I guess Catherine's a person to pass them to. Is that right?
Yes, please do. Please, and again, if you could, just have everybody just send, and if easiest for us really is page number and comment. We'll find where the paragraph is. If you want to do it quickly, it could be a simple email. If we could just all have them by the 28th, we're going to need, I don't know if everybody knows that we submit 3 weeks before HRB. We've done it every time. And the process is the process, but we don't have a lot of writing time after HRB to the next one. It's really lean. So if we could have all that, and then it will have a good, I guess we'll figure out when we have to submit the final to you, but my guess is probably the first Monday in November at the latest. So you can see, we only have 1 more week to get all this finalized, but please do, just do an email, or you can email me directly, seth@passconsultants.com, but I think you want to kind of shepherd everything, right? Yeah, and then we'll bang them out, but that's great, because again, we're so close to this sometimes that some of that stuff might be overlooked. And then some of the confusion will go away when we eliminate Carmel Cottage too, because I know there's a little overlap in a couple of those photos. I remember that specifically. So that'll clean it up a little bit too. So. Okay.
Very good.
Catherine, in your presentation, there were some things that you wanted decisions made on. So can we go through those and kind of narrow down what our guidance to you?
We can. Steve, if you'd like to pull it back up again. The first one was the theme names, specifically the Carmel dynamic. Are we okay with that one, everyone? Okay. And sounds like everyone's on board with the various styles. You have printouts there, but Carmel Cottage, everyone agrees. We're going to kind of rework that one and focus on vernacular instead.
Esther, did you have pushback on that specific issue?
Okay.
I think Carmel Plaza is given a lot of play there, and I think that was probably the last time that anybody really got up in arms. I mean, there was Piccadilly Park, but that seems rather isolated. I think that dynamic with so many second homes here, I just don't feel it anymore.
Well, maybe it ends in 1986 then. That's fair enough. And then when we get to the next theme, it won't be there anymore.
Well,
See how easy that was?
But seriously, I mean, but it's in the newspapers, it's in the literature. I mean, the city government for 12 years from the 70s to the 80s couldn't get the general plan done because of all this infighting, which I really think, doesn't that illustrate this dynamic? You know, so I think for this theme,
They're not listing yet, though. You just Carmel Plaza is an example.
as an example, yeah, and Piccadilly Park would be, if it's within 86, yeah, we're trying to support that with the primary information, you know, yeah.
Commercial development plan there, and that's why everybody was up in arms.
I just think that didn't they do, well, there may be some folks still here, but weren't they just so annoyed that it was such a big sort of big box mall kind of development in this village, right? Wasn't that primarily what was so troublesome? At least what I read in the history. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Does anyone have a preference on our captions? How much information needs to go for every single caption?
So
Part
the
of
narrative
yeah.
right now we write out street and avenue. It's arduous. We all know what it means, but it would take longer to change the narrative than it would the captions. But our suggestion, and Catherine's as well, was to simplify the captions with and I think Marty, I forget if we discussed this at the other meeting about captions, but it might simplify reading a caption if we don't have such long addresses. But anyway.
My question is, was there a reason why we decided not to use the standard address abbreviation, 3 Mission to northeast of 2nd or something like that?
This happens just to be a corner example, but for anything in the middle of a lot, that's how it would be. But look how many different variations. So obviously, if the building has a name, we'll say that. The year, we always want to put that. Beyond that, what are we spelling out? Do we always want to list the architect if it's known? You can also just leave it up to us to make the decision.
Well, bear in mind that most of these are all in the inventory, so all of that will be known. If you want our suggestion, we would just go with what Jordan's suggesting, and but on the captions, just go 2nd and Dolores. If it's the northeast corner of 2nd and Dolores. If it's between Ocean and 7th, it's Dolores 4 northeast of.
Well, you have the photograph. You can identify.
But also you have to
And you have the
remember that within the
photograph,
dynamic,
Yeah.
within 2 or 3 years, you might have numbers. And this is all going to be,
Of course.
Did you say 20 or 30 years? We might have numbers.
That's what's
I've
again.
been here 50 years.
That's what makes research and writing in this place so interesting, because I've thought of that too. Oh man, what happens if they go to house numbers? Now what do? We do an update just to change the addresses? Anyway.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, we'll go as streamlined as possible. Architect, yes or no? Not necessary. Alrighty.
Because they'll find that in the DPR when they come in.
Absolutely. I think those were really the questions we had.
So did we give you adequate guidance on this one, as far as end dates go? With the ones that you're keeping out?
Yeah.
Continuing.
Yeah. So our summary is Carmel Cottage is going to go out. We were talking about this in the car coming up here anyway, because we were anticipating that. We'll carry Carmel. We'll carry the vernacular style about to the end of the Village in the Forest theme till World War II. The end date styles will be arts and crafts. We should decide whether we want to go craftsman or arts and crafts, but arts and crafts, Tudor Revival, Storybook Revival, which of course Storybook includes all of most of Comstock's work, Spanish Eclectic, and of course the modern styles and ranch. So I guess it would be 5 going to 86.
Looks like a few more, but.
Is there a few more? Okay.
Like you have righty and organic as well, regional expressionist.
Oh, that actually brings up a good question. How many? Do we really have enough regional expressionist buildings? I mean, Butterfly House is out of the city limits. Is Albert Henry Hill's?
Hill stuff. I think.
But he also does so much flat roof stuff and other stuff. Yeah. I was wondering about taking that out. I don't know if we could discuss it. But.
Are not in the city limits myself.
Oh, no.
That we don't have a lot of buildings to cover for that style. I got to be honest with you. It's really, you have the Hofs's house, which is, the other side of the hotel, but you could run that in a Bay Region modern, frankly, couldn't you?
I think you could, third generation Bay Region.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would also kind of simplify the
I think
stylistic
it's
stuff in
gotten a
the
little
document.
draggy at the end there.
Okay.
All right, we're on the same page on that, okay. Let me just find that. What else, Catherine, just to remind us?
Organic.
What about writing organic? I mean, we're probably still building writing buildings still? How late does Mark Mills go?
Yeah, Mark Mills, well, Mark did 40 buildings in this general area, and he's a major figure, recognized as a world-class architect in Europe and also in most of the architectural journals that are done here in his lifetime. I think the organic, and it doesn't necessarily have to be writing, just call it organic.
You know, I was wondering that too. How does the commission feel about that? I mean, you know, organic can be much like arts and crafts. Organic can be somewhat of a confusing term. If all of us know architecture, so it's easy for us. But organic is an odd term, but it's all throughout Wright's literature, and he defined it himself. Do we need writing as well, or should we just call it an organic style?
On the style sheet, you do picture 4 buildings, all by 4 different architects.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think, Catherine?
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why we just want as many opinions as possible, because you know, sometimes you're splitting hairs of hairs. You know.
Yeah.
We'll think about it.
Yeah.
We'll work on it.
Okay.
I think that's really it.
Okay.
Thank you both very,
Yeah,
very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
I guess, sorry, how about photographs of buildings not yet listed? But really, like for this ranch particularly.
Well, they probably will be, but they're not now.
I think you have to, again, one of our mandates was to make sure that the people who are dealing with it can find this stuff. They can find it in the DPRs you have, that have gone to the state. You've had 3 surveys. You had Janix, Enid's, mine. So you have a lot of paper that they can refer to that's give them depth to what they're looking at.
It's
And if we
interesting.
go outside of that, then you're putting somebody in a position who may buy that house and come into it and say, well, wait a minute, you're not going to list my house, and it's in your contact statement.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. At the same time, you can ask almost anybody on the street what a ranch house is, and they know what it is.
Yeah.
Well,
You know, so
I would
it's-
almost disagree with that, because every time we have a ranch house come up, we all are in violent disagreement with what it is. And so, like, I think ranch is an example that we can never have too many photographs of, just because there's a lot of things that seem to fall under the ranch category.
Okay, well, I live and learn, man. I mean, that's really interesting, because it's just the ranch is a low
another
slung house built in
dynamic.
California. and
Another dynamic.
Yeah,
Seth.
it's the sub-dynamic of the
Okay.
dynamic. Okay.
All right. I think we might have had a comment from the audience, or maybe anyone on Zoom.
When do we sit
We
down?
could sit
Thank you.
I have no hands raised.
We do have a comment from the public. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mel Alborn, resident, and thank you, amazing work. Also you, Catherine. 2 points. The first, as you're describing the time periods and how some might continue to 1986, some might be more specific when a preponderance of that style might be present. I think for anyone reading this document, it would be helpful to have that described. The second point related to something that is not listed, like the ranch houses, but might be in the future, again, if specify that then, that not yet listed in some way. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I almost think that this should be focused on someone that doesn't live here. If they can understand it, then we've hit all marks. That's great. Okay, any other comments about the historic? Did we give you everything you needed to move forward?
Yes, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, if there's no further comments on that, then I think we'll go to the next item on the agenda, the public hearings. Do we have the, yeah. So 2 items listed under the public hearings. One was DS 24-204 Esperanza and Carmel LLC. That has been tabled to future date uncertain, and then the one we'll hear today is HE 24235 Bland.
I believe you need to vote on the continuance.
Oh, okay. Do I have a motion to approve the continuance of the DS 24204?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay. Can we get a vote, please?
Goodhue,
Yes.
Gualtieri,
Yes.
Pomeroy,
Yes.
Croman.
Yes. Okay,
Motion passes 4-0.
thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next item is Historic Evaluation 24235 Bland. Consideration of a determination to list the Lucy Hayward House at Camino Real to southwest of 7th on the inventory. As background, the city received a historic evaluation application in July for a Phase 1 initial assessment, and the initial assessment came back that the intensive was recommended, and the applicant indeed went forward with the intensive survey. So in September, the city contracted historian Margaret Clovis, prepared a DPR form, and determined that the Lucy Hayward House represents the theme of architectural development, retains substantial integrity, is over 50 years old, and meets California Register Criterion 3, which is architecture, at the local level, and also meets the municipal code requirements. So today you'll be reviewing the DPR form, staff report, and there was also an applicant-sponsored second opinion. This cottage was constructed in 1921. We have a building permit, but we don't have original plans. So it was an unknown designer builder for the first owner, Lucy Chamberlain Hayward. Interestingly, in 1989, the Planning Commission did approve a demolition. However, it didn't go forward. It was linked to a lot merger application, which was not approved. In any case, the property changed hands. In 1989, it's worth noting that the city didn't have its local coastal program, so it was not evaluated as a historic resource as we do today. I'll go through some photographs of the property. Here we are at, looking from Camino Real at the facade. You have the detached two-door garage at the north side of the property, and then kind of that U-shaped patio in the front. Here we are again, still looking from the street at the U-shaped patio, the south and north wings. You'll notice there is a mix in the fenestration between divided light and non-divided light windows. Here we have 3 doors leading onto the patio. And we also have an exterior brick chimney right in that front patio. This is the north side elevation, which is pretty minimally visible from the street. We have an exterior brick chimney again, the second one, and then there's one window that is clearly not original, and that was identified in the permit history. Here we are at the rear elevation. From left to right is kind of from north to south, so you have that bay, and then on the south end of the building, an enclosed sunroom. And then the south elevation. Here are just a couple of detail shots of the exposed rafters in the eaves, notched rafters, and then a good deal of Carmel stone site work, brick and stone site work throughout. So determining eligibility, as you all know, it needs to be representative of at least one theme in our context statement. It shall retain substantial integrity. It should be 50 years old, and it shall meet at least one of the criteria on the right there. Ms. Clovis and city staff agree it's significant for criterion 3 only, and I've highlighted the text in green that we feel apply here. It embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, region, or method of construction. It does not represent the work of a master or a creative individual or possess high artistic value. It's not a good example of an architectural style, but it is a good example of a type of construction recognized as significant in the context statement. So this is kind of key to this whole project or this whole application, the type of construction. Be a good example of an architectural style or type of construction. And that was identified as Carmel early 20th century residential architecture. Specifically, there is a field on the form that requests a style, and the consultant entered other with craftsman influences. So the subject house does closely align with the craftsman style as described in our context statement, but it lacks braces, stucco or shingle siding, and a porch. And those are in red on the right. And those are craftsman features that this home does not have. The features that the home does have on the left there, it's single story with an informal plan, horizontal proportions. It has board and batten siding, U-shaped wings that enclose a front brick patio, varied fenestration, we have sliding, fixed, casement, French doors. It does have the classic extended lintels and sills. It does have 2 exterior brick chimneys, a low-pitched complex gable and hipped roof system. It has the exposed notched rafters in the eaves, plank shutters, and as I mentioned, the Carmel stone hardscape. So the consultant identified this as other with craftsman style influences. Why? Because our current historic context statement really doesn't have a clear definition of vernacular. For that reason, staff concurred that other with craftsman influences was the appropriate identification. And the methodology behind that comes from the National Register Bulletin 16A, how to complete the National Register registration form. We don't really have guidance like this for Carmel, so we often go all the way up to how it's done nationwide. So I've highlighted the directions there, where our consultant was coming from. I know the board doesn't often see this identifier, but it very clearly states, if a style doesn't apply, you put in the period of time, and then you write other, and then you write, what stylistic influence there was. And then it also clearly says, don't enter vernacular, because it's not specific enough. We've just been talking about our context statement, which would make it specific enough to Carmel, but at this time, it's not. So the DPR form, as I mentioned, finds it significant for a type of construction, and then it also has integrity. So talking now about integrity, unfortunately, we don't have original plans and we don't have historic photographs. We always wish we had those. It would make everything so much easier, but we often don't. This cottage does have some permit history. Built in 1921. There was an unspecified building project in 1924. We don't have any details about that. The double garage was built in 1927. Carport was permitted, that was never built. And then just interior work, which isn't relevant to the board's decision tonight. Re-roof, it does still have a wood shake roof. And then the 500 square foot deck in the back. We do have Sanborn maps. The earliest one, citywide, the earliest one we have is 1924. So again, the cottage was built in 1921. We first have a look at it here in 1924. You can see that this highly irregular footprint hasn't changed since 1924. And then in 1930, you can see the garage built there, and then no changes in 62 to today. So again, there's our garage. The consultant identified the period of significance as 1921, so the garage falls outside of that period of significance, so it's not listed as one of the character-defining features. Again, here are the known changes. So it's the garage, this window is a known change, and then the deck is a known change. We also have some possible changes. Remember, there was that permit in 1924 that was unspecified. The permit was issued 1 month before the Sanborn map was drawn. So whatever the building project was, it was finished in a month. So it could have been the enclosure of that southwest rear sunroom. Maybe it was the front projecting gabled wing there. or maybe it was something else entirely or something that never happened. Other possible changes, we think that maybe some of the window lights were kind of retrofitted to include a screen. You can kind of see on that image on the left, the hinges where you can kind of open it. And then, like I mentioned before, and while we were on the site, there are both divided light windows and non-divided light windows. So it's potentially curious. We just don't really know if some windows were replaced or if the home was designed with different fenestration styles. In any case, the assessment of integrity came back and that it does retain integrity overall. Location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, the fact that there are no additions and no incompatible changes, we feel that this building does retain integrity. And it is worth noting the present condition of this building is poor. It has been vacant for several years and there is black mold. As you know, condition is something separate from integrity. The quote here is, it just says, a measure of integrity is not the same as an assessment of condition. Here's a local example of that in the Jeffers Cabin, if anyone doesn't know that building, but it's something separate entirely. Just a reminder. We did receive a second opinion from Dr. Anthony Kirk, a qualified architectural historian, and that was provided in your staff report. Happy to answer any questions about it. We can revisit it if you didn't get a chance to read it, I can come back to it. The staff recommendation is to adopt a resolution adding this property to the inventory, supporting the consultant recommendation. Alternatively, the board can adopt findings as to why the property is ineligible for listing, and then we'll issue a determination of ineligibility. We do have the property owner and the applicant here this evening. They are welcome to speak, not required, but welcome to.
Okay, so we'll open it up to the public. Anyone wishing to speak on behalf of the public, the owner or owner's representative?
Well, I think, and I appreciate everybody's time. Catherine, you've been great and walked us through the process, and that's been wonderful. The property is in very poor condition. It does have black mold. We have bees that are in the chimney. The chimney almost has to be removed in order to get the bees out. It's unfortunate that it has been left in terrible disrepair. The owners got very elderly and had to be removed from the house, and it has been sitting for quite a long time, leaking. There is black mold on the inside. We've had contractors take a look at the house in terms of, and again, I know you don't look at condition, but it's really not able to fix what is there. The foundation is gone. It's really crumbling on itself. It is unfortunate that we don't have any photos of what it was, what happened, whatever. The owners did purchase the house 33 years ago. And so they are not alive to give us any other kind of history of what was there when they bought it, et cetera, et cetera. So we had Dr. Kirk write us a report. I think this whole term other is kind of where we're kind of hanging our hat of what does other mean. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak?
My name's Bud Smith. I live in the house across the street. I've lived in Carmel most of my life. I even graduated from Sunset back in the years when it was a school. So I have real affection for old Carmel. I also have great affection for the house. My wife and I spent many times over there with the Stoffels who owned the house. I like the idea of declaring certain homes historic. Our home has been declared historic, and I like the idea that for future generations we'll be able to see the house and get an idea of what older Carmel was like. I know conditions are not technically relevant, but the problem with declaring this house historic is I think that the foundation, that the house in general and the foundation in particular is in such bad shape that it would be prohibitively expensive to fix it up. I don't think anyone's going to want to come and live in it. So it kind of misses the point of the whole historic designation, which is that people can see what a house looked like in Old Carmel. I think this one is going to it's going to be an old, abandoned house that just deteriorates slowly over the years. And as to the issue of architectural style, I love craftsmen's houses. I've seen lots of them. I have photography books at home full of them, and this one just doesn't look anything like any of the craftsman houses I've ever seen. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to the house and for holding this meeting. I'm Tricia Bland, Rod and Pat Stoffel's daughter. And just so you can understand that I did have to remove them from the house and move them to Bakersfield because it was so uninhabitable. My mom thought she was keeping it up, but they just couldn't maintain it. And due to the windows being original and doors just very leaky with air, and that's what caused the moisture in the interior and the mildew. So I know you don't look at, but I just wanted you to know that that's why I had to remove them from the house, was for its deterioration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, either in the audience or online? Okay, then we'll close the public portion of the session, and I would ask for thoughts from the.
I'm sorry that we didn't ask Kent Seavey when he was here why this wasn't included in the 2001 survey, because, I mean, it is over 100 years old now. But there must be some reason. He was very thorough in reading the historic context statement draft. We found out that the city had, I think, has over almost close to 300 houses. And I'm sure Kent would have spotted this. It's right there on the street. But do you know have you any idea, Catherine, why this wasn't included?
We didn't have it. I haven't discussed it at any length with him, and I don't want to speak for him.
Okay. I just wondered. Well, don't let me stop you, Esther.
I feel horrible about the condition of the house, and it's no fault of the present owner or the past owner. But I don't know. I mean, there are standards and guidelines, and if it's designated historic, I mean the log cabin that we were talking about, that was referred to before, is falling down, and I know another house in the county that the same thing is happening to. And yeah, I don't know. It's a horrible decision to have to make.
I don't know either. Is the ultimate best use of the lot to tear the house down? And if it's historic, can they not do that? And is it not economical to fix it? So, yeah, I don't know either. Do we need it on the historic register? Is it unique?
I mean, I think the key point to look at is in Mr. Kirk's letter, where he reiterates again, this is a other with craftsman influences. We talked about that, and Catherine walked us through that. But in our ability to agree or disagree, one of the things it says is this the best? Is it a best example of the style? And I would say in this instance, it's not the best example of the style.
Well, that's true of many houses that are historic.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think that's a determination. But
yeah. And so, I mean, there's a lot of echoes of craftsmen to me in this house. But if you look at the house, I'm not sure that you would look at that and say that's a craftsman house. And I think we do have some very good examples of craftsman homes.
Well, I think in the context of other designated craftsman homes, it is a craftsman home.
Yeah, you think so?
Yeah. I mean, vernacular craftsmen and even else.
One thing that is an influence to me in the draft context statement that we reviewed earlier, any building between 1902 and 1921 was considered rare. And so, I mean, I don't know what other, I'm just curious as to why it wasn't included all these many years. I mean, the fact that it was attempted to be sold, and then it was asked to be to not be considered historic. I don't know the details of that discussion. I wasn't here, but that also is a
You mean when it was approved for
question.
demolition?
Yes.
Mhm.
I don't know what the conversation was.
So I
But
can
it
add
is
I can add a little
unaltered.
bit to that.
Pardon me?
I can add a little bit of
Okay.
context to the 1989 decision. I believe there was a link in the staff report to our digitized property file, which has all the documents. There was a staff report that says the building has been added on to in 1924. They listed every year there was a permit and said the building has been altered and expanded in those years. But that is not a correct statement. None of those permits were for additions. They were for interior work. So that was one erroneous statement I found in the staff report. And then also there just wasn't a historic evaluation done because it wasn't a requirement at that time. We didn't have our historic preservation ordinance at that time.
Oh. It's a very difficult one to deal with, I think.
Would it be a waste to consider it historic? Because the house couldn't be used as a residence unless somebody put more money than it's worth into it. That wouldn't be the best use of the property to have a deteriorating historic house on it.
The concern that I have is that it's been pointed out that while it isn't in pristine condition, that isn't necessarily required to maintain integrity. It's kind of an odd thing to think of, though, because integrity does relate to the physical condition of a property. And yet, in the case of the slide you showed of the Robinson Jeffers cabin, that to me is another example of a house that has been let go through neglect.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it comes right back to the original history of Carmel. So with a cabin built of logs, there aren't that many examples of that. So that leaves us in a bad position. Well,
So if we look at the basis for determination, and we look at why we would think it would be ineligible, there's a series of criteria. So the property lacks sufficient age to be considered historic. We know that that's not correct.
mm-hmm.
The property has substantially lost its historic integrity through alterations, additions, deterioration, changes. We know that that's not correct based on the walkthrough that Catherine did with us. The property does not relate to historic themes or property types established in the historic context statement of Carmel-by-the-Sea. That may or may not. I think that's something to debate. The property has no association with important events, people, or architecture. Nobody significant mentioned in the context statement lived there. And there are better examples of the builder's work in the city. The builder wasn't called out, but I think we could use that as the style. So maybe if we look at what declares it ineligible, we can think then if we disagree with all those items, then is it eligible? Or if we want to go down the track of further looking at why it's ineligible, we might want to do that as well. Does that make sense, or some sense?
I think we just did.
Can I offer maybe a few comments for the board's consideration?
Great.
So one thing that you can consider, we heard a little bit about the foundation. It's not uncommon for a building to be lifted and a new foundation poured. So the board should consider whether the building is significant enough to warrant that type of rehabilitation. When the board evaluated the Jeffers cabin, it was found to be so significant that it was worth reconstructing. So it's been painstakingly inventoried and will be constructed to its original form. So the board should consider whether this property rises to that level of significance, that if it is beyond rehabilitation, whether reconstruction in kind is appropriate. And then just the last thing I'll offer is, again, not wanting to speak for Kent Seavey, but my understanding is that when he was charged with doing the citywide survey, he was given a hard cap of around 300 properties. So it's possible that he had to make some decisions. I don't know whether or not he evaluated this one, but I imagine he had to make some decisions to skip over certain properties because the city had given him that hard cap to work within. So just some things to consider.
Get him back over here. Talk to him today. That's too bad. Yeah, I heard that too, Marnie. Thank you for your comments. Those are very helpful. Well, were you reading from the determination of ineligibility, Jordan?
Ineligibility, just to see if we could, that might be a way that we could either, either kind of move forward with that or cross that out and have to then go back to the eligibility
well,
criteria.
as you pointed out, we know the age is sufficient. We know that it doesn't relate to any theme or property types, and it doesn't have any connection to events or people.
I would like to just interrupt you for a moment. The consultant's argument is that it's significant as a property type. And I can go back and pull the slide up. The type is
arts and crafts.
I'm just reading from this, the ineligibility. I'm not saying it is or
okay,
isn't.
just wanted to make sure, yeah.
But I'm saying that the one that the sticking point, it seems to be, is the fact that there has been deterioration and changes. I don't know how the rest of you feel about that. Esther, what do you think?
Oh, wow. As I said to begin with, this is just a really tough one. But the city consultant, Meg Clovis, found it significant. And I think we have to put that into play here. The human side of it is entirely something else. And that's why it's so very, very hard.
Okay. Do we want to do let's do a straw thumbs up, thumbs down on this before we vote. So if we were to have the discussion that we've had now, had the presentation we've heard from the owner and her representative, who's leaning towards eligible, can you indicate that you would want to put this on the registry and declare it historic?
List, not the registry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, on the list, yeah. So to deem it a historic property. Is there anyone? Okay, and we're probably more in agreement than we think we are.
Maybe so.
Okay.
Well, I came prepared before I saw the property and before I heard the presentation. I came prepared to support it, but to me, it falls more into the ineligible line. So I would recommend that we not put it on the inventory.
Okay, so would you like to turn that into a motion?
Okay, let me. I don't see it on here, sorry.
If you go to.
It's on the agenda.
Yeah. So here's the documentation.
Okay, HE 24235, I would make a motion that we determine that it is ineligible for the historic inventory.
Okay, can I have a second?
Second it.
Okay, thank you. Can we have, yeah.
Can we get the specific finding for ineligibility?
Oh, you want to go back to the,
Back to that, the
Yeah.
deterioration
Yeah.
issue. I'm sorry.
right over here.
Okay, the property has no association with important events, people, or architecture, and it has also, it's lost its historic integrity through deterioration or other causes.
Okay, and you still want to second it, Kathy? Okay. Can we have a vote, please?
Goodhue,
Yes.
Gualtieri,
Yes?
Pomeroy,
Yes.
Croman.
Yes.
Okay, that was a sad one,
Yeah.
but it seemed right.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Can we go back to the previous item to the DS 24-204 and just to ask why that has been continued?
I don't have a reason.
Okay. The owners have just decided to hold.
Yes.
Okay.
So we'll either come back to you, or I'll come back saying that it has been formally withdrawn.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. Any other comments in the public hearing arena?
We have no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, great. So can we go to the director's report, please?
We've been waiting for that.
Actually, I think there might be one item before the director's report. Oh, no, it is the director's report. My apologies. Okay. The first item I want to speak to is one of our current capital improvement plan projects. So over at the Sunset Center, there are 2 classroom buildings at the south end of the property, and the windows get a significant amount of southern exposure and have deteriorated over time. So Public Works included repair and restoration of those windows as one of their capital improvement projects. We did process a design review application for that project. It was approved back in August of 2023. Because it is a window repair and in-kind limited replacement of parts, the code does give staff the opportunity to review and approve those. The code also gives us discretion to work with a qualified consultant for input, and we did take advantage of that. So we had Meg Clovis do a phase 2 report on the project. She did find that the approach to the window repair was consistent with the Secretary's standards. So we went ahead and issued that design review approval. The contract for the work was awarded in August of this year. The contract amount is around $168,000. And Pro-X Construction is currently undertaking the repairs. Some of the windows may be removed and taken off-site for repair, but the approach really is to repair the components and only replace specific components where needed. So this is not an entire window replacement where we're just gonna get rid of the old and pop in some new windows. Great care was taken to look at each component of the window to determine whether or not it could be repaired. The project is slated. They also did get a building permit. So these capital improvement projects do go through the normal process that other projects go through. And so a building permit was issued and they are slated for completion at the end of this year. So just wanted to share that update with the board. There's quite a few.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not just the south elevation, but those are the windows that are in kind of the worst shape. So we'll see more components of those windows being recreated in kind.
Thank you.
And then a couple other items under the director's report. This Saturday is the 9th annual pumpkin roll, which I always get very excited about. So October 26th from 11 to 1, if you feel so inclined, you can roll a pumpkin down Ocean Avenue. It's a lot of fun. Next Tuesday, October 31st, is our annual holiday parade and city birthday celebration. So the city will be turning 108 years old. The parade starts at 4:30. If the board members would like to participate in the parade, we ask that you reach out to Leslie Fenton in our community activities department. And if you need her contact information, feel free to reach out to me. On November 4th, the City Council will be hearing the Rodriguez appeal. So this was the Henry J. Olaf House that the board had evaluated and placed on the historic inventory. It's a 1933 Tudor revival by Ernest Bixler. The owners did appeal the listing to City Council. The City Council did express support in delisting it or not keeping it on the inventory. It's going back on November 4th for the council to make specific findings for that. Last couple items, the director recruitment is ongoing. So we're still looking for someone to fill that position. November 1st, we will have a new administrative coordinator joining our team. Really excited about this new addition. So Leah Young has transitioned over to doing code compliance and permit technician work. And so we'll have a new face filling her position and sitting where Jake is tonight. Thank you, Jake, for sitting in. We really appreciate it. And then also we have a new consulting planner who's joined our team starting today. She had to leave, but Jessica Scholl is from Harrison Associates, and she's going to be helping us out while we do the recruitment for the principal planner position that is open. So that is my director's report. Happy to answer any questions.
What principal planner? Isn't that your position?
So my position focusing on housing was a new position that was created this budget cycle. So July 1, they created a new position to focus on implementation of the housing element. And I expressed interest in doing that. So they need to backfill my old position in current planning.
So does this mean we won't be seeing you anymore?
You may not be seeing me as much.
Don't we have a say in that?
Yeah, I was going to say, we're happy to not recruit anybody, just keep you here, but I guess that's not going to happen.
If it's something you like.
That is a tactic.
Yeah.
If it's a challenge for you that you want.
Well, you've been great for as much longer as we can have you. You've been fantastic.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. Yes,
Thanks.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Any board member announcements? Any subcommittee reports? Future agenda items? No? Okay. We'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work, Catherine. You did a lot of work.
Yeah,
Yes, you
for sure.
did. It was wonderful.